The waiter ignored the elderly black woman sitting quietly at table 12 in the upscale Riverside Bistro, his eyes passing over her simple floral dress and worn leather purse, the same purse she'd carried for 20 years, as he focused on the younger professionals in expensive suits who looked like they could afford the restaurant's $30 entrees and leave generous tips. What 24-year-old Tyler Johnson could never have imagined was that the 78-year-old woman he was deliberately avoiding, Mrs. Vivian Foster, was the anonymous benefactor who had personally invested $2.8 million to create this very restaurant, owned the entire brick building where it operated, and had been quietly transforming this historically black neighborhood for the past 5 years. Mrs. Foster adjusted her reading glasses and checked her simple Timex watch, the same practical timepiece she'd worn since 1985, as she realized she'd been sitting at table 12 for 28 minutes without so much as a glass of water. The irony wasn't lost on her. In 1963, as a 17-year-old girl in Birmingham, Alabama, she'd been refused service at a downtown lunch counter because of her skin color. Now, 59 years later, in a restaurant she'd funded specifically to ensure that everyone received dignified service regardless of race or appearance, she was being ignored again. The warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the restaurant's large windows illuminated the carefully chosen details that reflected Mrs. Foster's vision, exposed brick walls that honored the building's 1920s heritage, photographs of the neighborhood's history during the jazz era, and tables made from reclaimed wood that had once been part of the old Paramount Theater, where black musicians had performed during segregation. Every design element had been selected to celebrate the community's resilience and cultural richness. Tyler Johnson wiped down the same section of counter for the third time, stealing glances at table 12 while calculating his strategy for the busy Friday evening shift. A recent graduate from community college with $15,000 in student loan debt, Tyler worked 45 hours a week at Riverside Bistro while studying for his real estate license at night. His mother, Sandra Johnson, cleaned office buildings downtown for $12 an hour and often worked double shifts to help him pay rent on their shared apartment. Tyler had learned to maximize his earnings by focusing on customers who appeared affluent, a survival strategy that had served him well until tonight. Mrs. Foster opened her simple black handbag, its worn leather soft from decades of use, and retrieved the small notebook where she recorded observations during her quarterly visits to the businesses she supported. Her handwriting, precise from years of teaching elementary school before her real estate career, documented Tyler's deliberate avoidance. 2:15 p.m. Server passed table 4 times without acknowledgement, provided immediate service to adjacent table with 2 men in business suits. Pattern suggests discrimination based on customer appearance assessment. The restaurant buzzed with the comfortable sounds of a successful Friday afternoon. The gentle clink of silverware against plates, conversations mixing English and Spanish from neighborhood families, and the soft jazz playing from speakers hidden throughout the dining room. Mrs. Foster had specifically requested local musicians for the soundtrack, wanting customers to hear the same melodies that had filled these streets during the Harlem Renaissance, when this neighborhood had been a center of black cultural life. Tyler's discrimination wasn't malicious. It was practical, born from financial pressure that many young people his age understood intimately. His calculation was simple. Older customers, especially those who looked like they might be on fixed incomes, typically ordered less expensive items and left smaller tips. His Friday shift needed to generate at least $60 in tips to cover his portion of the electric bill that was due Monday morning. But his assumptions about Mrs. Foster couldn't have been more wrong. The elderly woman sipping ice water at table 7 was Mrs. Dorothy Chen, an 81-year-old retired seamstress who came to Riverside Bistro every Friday for the early bird special. She'd been watching Tyler's treatment of Mrs. Foster with growing concern, recognizing the signs of discrimination that reminded her of her own experiences as a Chinese immigrant in the 1960s. Mrs. Chen had cleaned houses for wealthy families who treated her as invisible, despite her college degree from Taiwan that hadn't been recognized in America. "Excuse me, young man," Mrs. Foster called softly, as Tyler carried a basket of warm cornbread, past her table for the second time, heading toward a table of young professionals who'd arrived 15 minutes after her. "I'd like to place an order when you have a moment." Tyler's response revealed his inexperience in handling the situation gracefully. "Oh yeah, sorry. I'll be right back," he mumbled without making eye contact, his tone carrying the dismissive quality that service workers sometimes used with customers they considered low priority. He didn't notice Mrs. Foster's slight flinch at his casual disrespect, a reaction born from 60 years of similar slights that had taught her to expect better treatment in spaces she'd specifically created to provide it. Mrs. Foster's patience came from hard-earned wisdom about choosing battles carefully. During her 43 years in real estate development, she'd learned that immediate confrontation often produced defensive responses that prevented real learning and change. Her approach to Tyler's behavior would be strategic rather than emotional, educational rather than punitive, though the familiar sting of being dismissed because of her age and race brought back memories she'd thought she'd left behind. The restaurant's lunch crowd included several neighborhood regulars who knew Mrs. Foster by sight, though few understood her role in creating the establishment. Mr. James Murphy, a 72-year-old retired postal worker, sat at his usual corner table reading the local newspaper while enjoying Riverside Bistro's famous shrimp and grits, a recipe developed by Chef Williams to honor both Southern traditions and the neighborhood's growing Caribbean population. As Tyler continued to delay service to table 12, Mrs. Foster reflected on the conversation she'd had with her late husband Harold before making the investment in Riverside Bistro. "Vivian," he'd said during his final months battling cancer, "don't just give money away. Create something that changes how people treat each other. Make a place where everybody's grandmother gets the same respect as everybody's boss." Harold had died before seeing the restaurant open, but his words had guided every decision about its operation. The afternoon was progressing toward the dinner rush, and Mrs. Foster's presence at table 12 was becoming a test of everything she'd hoped to achieve through her investment in Riverside Bistro. Tyler's behavior represented a failure of the training programs she'd funded, the inclusive service standards she'd established, and the community values she'd tried to instill in this space. Her response would determine whether this moment became a learning opportunity or simply another disappointment in a lifetime that had included too many similar experiences. As the clock above the kitchen door ticked past 2:45 p.m., Mrs. Foster found herself transported back to 1963, sitting at Woolworth's lunch counter in Birmingham with her best friend Mary Alice, waiting for service that never came while white customers were seated and served around them. The familiar feeling of being invisible in plain sight brought tears to her eyes, not tears of self-pity, but of profound sadness that after 60 years of progress, a young black man was now treating an elderly black woman with the same disregard their community had fought so hard to overcome. Tyler Johnson mechanically refilled water glasses at nearby tables while stealing glances at his phone, checking the time against his mental calculations of tip income. His shift supervisor, Maria Santos, a 48-year-old single mother of 3, had been watching the situation unfold with growing concern. Maria remembered her own grandmother, Abuela Rosa, who had cleaned houses for rich families in Houston and often came home with stories about being treated as if she didn't exist. Seeing Mrs. Foster sitting, ignored at table 12, brought back painful memories of her grandmother's quiet dignity in the face of disrespect. "Tyler," Maria whispered as he passed the service station. "Table 12 has been waiting 45 minutes. That's not acceptable. She's an elderly lady sitting by herself. Show some respect." Tyler's response revealed the pressure he was under and the misguided priorities that had shaped his customer service approach. I know. But look at her, Maria. She's probably just going to order the soup and water, maybe leave $2. Table 8 just ordered 3 appetizers and 2 bottles of wine. I need to focus on where the money is." Maria's expression hardened as she processed Tyler's callous calculation. As someone who had grown up watching her mother work 3 jobs to keep their family housed and fed, she understood financial pressure, but she also understood dignity and respect. "Tyler, that woman could be your grandmother." How would you feel if someone treated your abuela like she doesn't matter because of how she looks? The question hit Tyler harder than Maria had intended, because his grandmother, Meemaw Betty, had indeed faced similar treatment throughout her life. Betty Johnson had worked as a domestic worker for white families in Mississippi during the 1950s and 1960s, enduring daily humiliations while maintaining the grace and strength that had held their family together through segregation and poverty. Tyler's college education had been partially funded by the small savings account Meemaw Betty had maintained for 50 years, contributing $5 a month from her meager wages because she believed education was the path to a better life. Mrs. Foster opened her worn notebook and continued documenting the experience, her precise handwriting capturing details that would later inform improvements to staff training and supervision protocols. But her observations went beyond Tyler's behavior to include the restaurant's atmosphere, the way other customers were interacting, and the effectiveness of the inclusive environment she'd tried to create. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. At table 7, Mrs. Dorothy Chen finished her lunch and approached Mrs. Foster's table with the determination of someone who had witnessed enough injustice for one lifetime. "Excuse me, dear," she said gently. "I've been coming here every Friday for 2 years, and I've never seen service this poor. Would you like me to speak to the manager? This isn't right." Mrs. Foster looked up at Mrs. Chen's kind face and felt a familiar warmth at the solidarity between two elderly women who understood the importance of treating each other with dignity. "Thank you for your concern," Mrs. Foster replied softly. "I think I'll handle this situation myself, but I appreciate your kindness more than you know." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly and squeezed Mrs. Foster's shoulder gently before returning to her table. The simple gesture created a moment of connection that reminded Mrs. Foster why she'd invested in creating Riverside Bistro, not just to provide excellent food, but to foster the kind of community where people looked out for each other across lines of age, race, and background. Tyler's internal conflict was becoming more visible as he struggled between his financial calculations and the growing awareness that his treatment of Mrs. Foster was wrong. His mother, Sandra, had raised him with clear expectations about respecting elders, especially elderly black women who had endured decades of discrimination and deserved honor rather than dismissal. But the pressure of student loans and living expenses had created a survival mentality that overrode his better instincts. The restaurant's kitchen buzzed with the preparation for Friday evening's dinner service, and the aroma of Chef Williams' famous jambalaya began wafting through the dining room, a recipe that honored both his Louisiana heritage and the neighborhood's diverse Caribbean population. Mrs. Foster had specifically recruited Chef Williams because of his commitment to creating dishes that reflected the community's cultural richness while maintaining the culinary excellence that would attract food enthusiasts from across the city. As Tyler continued to avoid table 12, Mrs. Foster made a decision that would change the trajectory of the entire evening. She stood slowly, her arthritis making the movement more deliberate than it once would have been, and walked directly to the service station where Tyler was unnecessarily arranging coffee cups to avoid making eye contact with her. "Young man," Mrs. Foster said, her voice carrying the quiet authority developed through decades of teaching children and managing real estate transactions. "I'd like to speak with you for a moment about customer service and the way we treat each other in this community." Tyler's face flushed with embarrassment and defensive anger as he realized he could no longer avoid the conversation he'd been dreading. "Look, lady, I'm really busy right now. Can't you see I have other customers to take care of?" The dismissive response, calling her lady instead of ma'am, and suggesting that other customers were more important, represented exactly the kind of disrespectful treatment that Mrs. Foster had hoped to eliminate through her investment in staff training and inclusive service standards. Her disappointment was visible, but so was her determination to turn this moment into an opportunity for growth and understanding rather than simply a confrontation to be won or lost. The moment that would transform everything began at precisely 3:17 p.m., when the brass bells above Riverside Bistro's entrance chimed softly, and Mayor Patricia Williams stepped through the doorway, her silver hair catching the afternoon light as she scanned the dining room with obvious purpose. The mayor's expression shifted from professional focus to genuine warmth as her eyes found Mrs. Foster standing at the service station, and she moved through the restaurant with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where she needed to be. "Mrs. Foster," Mayor Williams called out, her voice carrying both affection and relief. "There you are. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon about the community college proposal. Your assistant mentioned you might be having lunch at Riverside Bistro." She paused, noticing Mrs. Foster's position near the service station and Tyler's uncomfortable posture. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Tyler's world tilted sideways as he processed the mayor's familiar greeting and the obvious respect in her voice when addressing the woman he'd been ignoring for nearly an hour. Mayor Patricia Williams wasn't just any politician. She was the city's first black female mayor, a civil rights lawyer who had grown up in this very neighborhood during integration, and someone whose approval could make or break businesses throughout the downtown area. Mrs. Foster's face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing her longtime friend and collaborator. "Patricia, how wonderful to see you. I was just having a conversation with Tyler here about customer service standards. Perhaps you'd like to join me for coffee so we can discuss the community college funding proposal?" The mayor's trained political instincts immediately detected the tension in the situation, and her expression grew more serious as she began to understand that Mrs. Foster had been experiencing service problems. As someone who had personally witnessed Mrs. Foster's transformative impact on community development over the past decade, Mayor Williams felt protective of the woman who had become both a mentor and a dear friend. "Of course I'd love to join you," the mayor replied, then turned to Tyler with the kind of direct attention that made experienced politicians and nervous young people equally uncomfortable. "Tyler, isn't it?" she said, reading his name tag. "I hope you're taking good care of Mrs. Foster. She's one of our city's most important community leaders and has been instrumental in bringing economic development and opportunity to this neighborhood." Tyler's mouth went dry as he realized that his assumptions about Mrs. Foster had been not just wrong, but potentially catastrophic for his employment. The woman he dismissed as an unimportant elderly customer was apparently someone with enough community influence to command the mayor's personal attention and afternoon schedule. Restaurant manager David Chen emerged from the kitchen at that moment, having noticed the mayor's arrival and recognizing the need to ensure that such a prominent visitor received exceptional service. David had immigrated from Taiwan in 1995 and had worked his way up from dishwasher to restaurant manager through 15 years of dedicated service in the hospitality industry. He understood both the importance of treating all customers with respect and the potential consequences when community leaders had negative experiences at local businesses. "Mayor Williams," David said with professional warmth, extending his hand in greeting. "What an honor to have you visit us today. I hope everything has been satisfactory with your dining experience." The mayor's smile was polite, but measured as she responded, "Actually, David, I'm here to meet with Mrs. Foster, and I'm concerned that she may not have received the level of service that reflects well on your establishment or our community's commitment to hospitality and respect for all residents." David's expression immediately shifted to concern as he turned to Mrs. Foster, recognizing that a service failure involving someone with the mayor's attention could have serious implications for the restaurant's reputation and community relationships. "Mrs. Foster, please accept my sincere apologies if you've experienced any issues with our service today. I'd like to personally ensure that you and Mayor Williams have an exceptional dining experience." Mrs. Foster's response reflected both her disappointment with Tyler's behavior and her understanding that this moment could serve as a valuable teaching opportunity for everyone involved. "David, I've been sitting at table 12 for over an hour without receiving basic service from Tyler. I understand that restaurants can be busy, but the treatment I've received suggests that there may be some gaps in staff training about inclusive customer service and the importance of treating all patrons with dignity and respect." Tyler's face burned with embarrassment as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The mayor's presence had transformed his discriminatory service from a simple tip calculation error into a community relations crisis that could affect not just his employment, but also the restaurant's standing with city officials and community leaders. "Mrs. Foster," Tyler stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm really sorry. I didn't know. I should have provided better service regardless of. I made a mistake." The apology was sincere, but inadequate, revealing Tyler's growing awareness that his treatment of Mrs. Foster had been wrong, while also exposing his assumption that respectful service should depend on a customer's perceived importance, rather than their fundamental dignity as a human being. Mayor Williams stepped closer to Tyler, her expression showing the kind of firm but educational approach that had characterized her career in civil rights advocacy. "Tyler, Mrs. Foster's work in community development has created hundreds of jobs in this neighborhood, including yours. Her investment in local businesses and affordable housing has transformed this area from a neglected part of our city into a thriving community where families can build good lives. Every person deserves respectful service, but Mrs. Foster's contributions to this community make your treatment of her particularly difficult to understand." The mayor's words were creating layers of revelation that went far beyond Tyler's simple service failure. Mrs. Foster wasn't just a community leader. She was apparently a major investor whose work had directly impacted the economic opportunities available to young people like Tyler himself. Mrs. Foster placed a gentle hand on Tyler's arm, her touch conveying forgiveness rather than condemnation. "Tyler, I can see that you're a hard-working young man who's trying to make a living in a challenging economy. What I'd like you to understand is that great service isn't about calculating which customers might spend more money or leave bigger tips. It's about recognizing the dignity and worth of every person who walks through that door, regardless of their age, race, or appearance." The conversation was attracting attention from other customers and staff members throughout the restaurant, creating an impromptu teaching moment that would influence not just Tyler's behavior, but also the entire establishment's approach to customer service and community relations. 3 years after the afternoon when Tyler Johnson learned that the elderly black woman he'd ignored was not only Mayor Williams' most trusted community development advisor, but also the anonymous owner of Riverside Bistro itself, the restaurant had become a nationally recognized model for inclusive hospitality and community-centered business practices. The story of Tyler's transformation from a discriminatory server to the restaurant's assistant manager and community outreach coordinator had been featured in hospitality industry publications and diversity training programs across the country. The full revelation of Mrs. Foster's ownership had come 2 hours after Mayor Williams' arrival, during a private meeting in the restaurant's back office, where David Chen learned that his employer, the entire staff's paychecks, and the restaurant's existence depended on the vision and generosity of the woman Tyler had dismissed because of her modest appearance and advanced age. The conversation had been both humbling and transformative, leading to comprehensive changes in training, supervision, and the restaurant's fundamental approach to customer service. Tyler's journey from that devastating afternoon to his current leadership role had been neither quick nor easy, but it had been supported at every step by Mrs. Foster's patient mentorship and unwavering belief in the possibility of genuine change. The day after the mayor's visit, Tyler had written a 4-page letter to Mrs. Foster, sharing the story of his grandmother Meemaw Betty's experiences with discrimination and expressing his horror at realizing he had perpetuated the same treatment towards someone who could have been his own elder. "Mrs. Foster saved my career and changed my entire understanding of what it means to serve people with dignity," Tyler often told the groups of hospitality workers and college students who visited Riverside Bistro to learn about inclusive customer service. "I thought I was being smart by focusing on customers who looked wealthy, but I was actually destroying everything this restaurant was created to represent. She could have fired me that day, and no one would have questioned her decision. Instead, she invested in my growth and helped me become someone better." Tyler's personal story had become central to the restaurant's training program, where new employees learned not just practical service skills, but also the historical context of discrimination in the hospitality industry, and the importance of treating every customer as someone's beloved family member. His transformation was particularly powerful because it demonstrated that even well-meaning people could harbor unconscious biases that affected their professional behavior and community relationships. The restaurant's success had exceeded every projection Mrs. Foster had made when she first envisioned creating a space that would honor the neighborhood's heritage while serving as an engine for economic development. The wall near the entrance now displayed photographs from the restaurant's history, including images from the 2019 visit by a delegation of international mayors studying community development models, and the 2021 ceremony when Riverside Bistro received the National Restaurant Association's Award for Outstanding Community Impact. Mrs. Foster's quarterly visits had evolved from anonymous assessments to celebrated occasions when staff members, regular customers, and community leaders gathered to share updates about their families, careers, and contributions to the neighborhood's continued growth. At 81, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her weekly presence at table 12, now permanently reserved with a small brass plaque reading Mrs. Vivian Foster, Community Builder, remained a source of inspiration for everyone who worked at or visited the restaurant. The relationship between Tyler and Mrs. Foster had deepened into something resembling that between a grandmother and grandson, with Tyler often visiting Mrs. Foster's modest brick house on Sunday afternoons to help with grocery shopping and yard work while discussing his progress toward completing his bachelor's degree in business administration. Mrs. Foster had established a scholarship fund specifically for Riverside Bistro employees pursuing higher education, and Tyler had been its first recipient. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. The mayor's partnership with Mrs. Foster had expanded far beyond that initial afternoon meeting to encompass a comprehensive approach to community development that had attracted federal funding, private investment, and national recognition for innovative models of inclusive economic growth. The success of Riverside Bistro had catalyzed the development of 12 additional businesses in the surrounding blocks, creating over 300 jobs while maintaining affordability and accessibility for longtime neighborhood residents. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, who had witnessed Tyler's initial treatment of Mrs. Foster, had become one of the restaurant's most effective ambassadors, bringing friends and family members to experience what she called the place where everyone matters. At 84, Mrs. Chen still occupied her regular table every Friday, but now she was often joined by a rotating group of elderly residents who had found community and respect at Riverside Bistro after years of feeling invisible in other establishments. The training programs developed at Riverside Bistro had been implemented at over 50 restaurants across the region, with Tyler serving as a consultant and speaker who helped other hospitality workers understand the connection between inclusive service and both moral responsibility and business success. His presentations always included the story of his grandmother, Meemaw Betty, and the lesson that every customer deserved to be treated with the same respect he would want for his own family members. When I look back on that afternoon 3 years ago, Mrs. Foster reflected during the restaurant's anniversary celebration, I remember feeling disappointed and hurt by Tyler's treatment, but I also remember seeing a young man who was capable of growth and change. Tyler's transformation has proven that people can learn and improve when they're given opportunities for education rather than simply being punished for their mistakes. His development has made our entire community stronger and more welcoming. Tyler's closing remarks at the anniversary event captured the personal and professional transformation that had occurred through Mrs. Foster's patient mentorship. 3 years ago, I thought success meant maximizing my tips by focusing on customers who looked like they had money. Mrs. Foster taught me that real success means creating an environment where every person who walks through our doors feels valued and respected. That lesson didn't just change how I work. It changed who I am and how I want to contribute to building the kind of community where everyone's grandmother would feel welcomed and honored. The elderly black woman who had been ignored and dismissed had become the heart of a business model that proved dignity, respect, and community investment could create profound transformation that extended far beyond one restaurant to influence an entire industry's understanding of hospitality, service, and the fundamental human need to be seen and valued regardless of age, race, or economic circumstances. Mrs. Foster's story had become a powerful reminder that assumptions about people based on appearance could prevent recognition of wisdom, generosity, and influence that existed in unexpected forms, and that the most meaningful moments of change often emerged when patience, grace, and commitment to human dignity were offered to those who seemed to matter least, but who actually mattered most of all.